backs of lorries when there were children. They didn't see why they should start now. Old Granny Morgie, insisted that all the men look the other way so they couldn't see up her skirt. For example, an older Dorrit whimpered so much that Maskelyne had to lower him again so Grimmer could blindfold him. It wasn't so bad after he'd hauled it up the first few because they were able to help on the rope, but time still stretched out. He pulled Grimmer up at last. She was light. They were all light. If it came to that, you didn't need to get wrapped every day. It was amazing. They were all on board. He'd worked with an ear cocked for the sound of footsteps on the gravel, slamming of the driver's door, and it hadn't happened. Right, he said, shaking with the effort. That's it then. Now, if we just go. I dropped the thing, said old Dorrit. The thing. I dropped it. Do you see? I dropped it down by the wheel when she was blindfolding me. You go and get it, boy. Maskelyne looked at him in horror. Then he poked his head out from under the tarpaulin, and yes, there it was, far below. A tiny black cube on the ground. The thing. It was lying in a puddle, although that wouldn't affect it. Nothing touched the thing. It wouldn't even burn. And then he heard the sound of a few slow footsteps on the gravel. There's no time, he whispered. There really is no time. We can't go without it, said Grimmer. Of course we can, it's just a thing. We won't need the wretched object where we're going. He felt guilty as soon as he'd said it, amazed at his own lips for uttering such words. Grimmer looked horrified. Granny Morgie drew herself up to a full, quivering height. May you be forgiven, she barked. What a terrible thing to say. You tell him, Dorrit. She nudged Dorrit in the ribs. If we ain't taking the thing, I ain't going, said Dorrit sulkily. It's not. That's your leader talking to you, interrupted Granny Morgie. So you do what you're told. Leave it behind, indeed. It wouldn't be decent. It wouldn't be right. You go and get it this minute. Maskelyne stared wordlessly down the soaking mud, and then with desperate motion threw the line over the edge and slid down it. It was raining hard now, with a touch of